Hello, and thanks for joining us. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our webinar today on how to start your needed infrastructure project. My name is Tess Clark. I work here at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. And before we get started, I'm going to go quickly over some important information on our program today. So first, some logistics. Please keep in mind that everyone is on mute to ensure audio quality. I also want to draw your attention to the question dialog box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Please send us your questions using that box. We will be saving time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so we'll get to your questions by the end. We will also post today's presentation and a webinar recording on our website, efcnetwork.org. This webinar has not been submitted to licensing agencies for pre-approval of continuing education credits. However, we will provide a certificate of attendance for your personal records. You will need to check with your licensing agency directly if you're interested in receiving educational credit. You must attend the entire 60-minute session by logging into the GoToWebinar with your unique registration link in order to receive a certificate. This certificate will be emailed to you within 30 days of the webinar date, and you should utilize this document to self-submit. So it's important that you give us a correct email address, and also important that you stay for the whole session. Now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network is a university-based network providing individualized technical assistance, workshops, small group support, webinars, and more to small systems in the U.S. and territories. We focus primarily on small water systems and helping those systems meet their goals and regulatory requirements. And here you can take a look at our programs team. Like I said, we are a network of EFCs, Environmental Finance Centers, mostly based at universities across the country. During today's webinar, you'll hear from one of our staff. Our centers specialize in several areas of assistance important to water infrastructure, including asset management, fiscal planning, rates analysis, and infrastructure funding, which you'll hear about today. Specialists from our centers are available to water systems for free or low-cost technical assistance work. For more information, you can reach out to small systems at syr.edu or go to efcnetwork.org. On that note, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. John Sullivan is a senior research engineer at the Great Lakes Environmental Infrastructure Center at the Center for Technology and Training at Michigan Technological University. GLEIC also serves as the EPA Region 5 Environmental Finance Center. He specializes in water and wastewater design, operation, and municipal management. So John, with that, I'm going to give you the screen invitation and let you get started.
Thank you.
All right, so you should be getting your screen invitation so we can get going.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Today we'll talk about starting your needed infrastructure project. We'll talk about the project financing process. I've got 6 steps listed here on the slide. Number 1, identify the funding sources for the intended project, and assemble a team of professionals, create your project plan, apply for funding, secure that funding, design and build that project. So the balance of this presentation will focus on each of these 6 steps listed on this slide. Securing funding is generally a multi-year process. Be patient. Funding will eventually be there. So let's locate the money. There are generally 2 major sources for your project. They being the USDA Rural Development and your State Revolving Loan Funds. There are secondary funding sources. The HUD Community Development Block Grants, known affectionately as CDBG grants, and the U.S. Economic Development Grants, EDA. And there's other state programs. States receive HUD block grants for non-metropolitan communities, which are less than 50,000 in population. Communities greater than 50,000 population and urban counties receive their HUD block grants direct. But the smaller communities have to compete through a state program typically to get some of that CDBG money. EDA grants are related to economic development in communities with high unemployment and low median household income. Several states have supplemental loan and grant programs to assist your environmental infrastructure projects. We'll look at the major environmental infrastructure funding mechanism, USDA. Since this program is one of the most popular programs for municipalities with a population less than 10,000 or less, we will go through the process of obtaining a USDA funding in detail. This is a national program, thus is available in every state. It provides a variety of grants and loans for water and wastewater projects. Again, it's for small communities, population 10,000 or less. They have long-term loans up to 40 years available for water and wastewater projects. Interest rates, generally below market rates, vary quarterly and are based on the need for the project and the median household income of the area to be served. Grants are available to keep user costs reasonable. If the median household income is between 80% of the non-metropolitan median household income and the state non-metropolitan median household income, then there can be a grant of up to 45% of the project cost to try to keep the cost reasonable for the user. If the median household income is less than 80% of the state non-metropolitan median household income, and the projects necessary to alleviate health or sanitary problems, the grant can be up to 75% of the project cost. There are other factors that are considered for grants. And the interest rate is fixed as a maximum when the funds are obligated. However, it can be lower at loan closing. If the rates have gone down by the time the loan is closed, then you get the rate that comes in, is effective at that date. The rates effective on January 1, 2019 were the poverty rate of 2.5%, an intermediate rate of 3.375%, and a market rate of 4.25%. The median household income numbers are the numbers that are different in each state and are what RD uses in determining the interest rate level and which communities qualify for grants. Other factors for grants include, what is the existing debt? What are the O&M expenses projected for the project? The number of equivalent dwelling units, the type of bond, and similar system utility charges. The goal with RD is an affordable annual user charge of 1.5% of median household income, and that is 1.5%. That's 1.5% for each utility, the water utility and the wastewater utility, each at 1.5%. Who may apply for this? Again, it's public bodies, nonprofit organizations, and federally recognized tribes. The rural areas and towns of 10,000 or less. The funds can be used to acquire, construct, or improve improvements for projects for drinking water, sewage systems, solid waste, and stormwater. You can use the money for legal and engineering fees, for land acquisition and equipment, for startup operations, For construction period interest, the cost of money during construction, and to purchase facilities. We'll look at the RD process overview. There's first the application, and finally, after the application is submitted and accepted, there's a letter of conditions, and we'll go over each of those items. And then you submit the plans and specs to RD and the state agency for review and approval. Secure all the permits and easements, bid the project, have a loan closing, and construction proceeds. The following slides will describe the contents of the application, which in the past was done in a paper format. RD has changed the application to an electronic format. So the application, there's standard form 424, that's the applicant information, employer ID, the DUNS number, and a narrative, something about the project history, the need, the services provided, the beneficiaries, the public perception of the project, and the a system map. Also, a preliminary engineering report is part of the application. Environmental review is part of it, and then some customer information, the project budget, state and regional clearinghouse review submissions, and the public notice of intent to file with RD within 60 days of the application. That customer information, we'll get into that a little further in one of the slides, and it's the number of residential equivalent users for the system, and also deals with you need to turn in your user rate system. How are you charging now, and what are you charging? The budget that is part of the application identifies all sources of funds for the project. The documentation that you have to turn in as part of the application include an audit report done by a CPA, certification of commercial credit, that you have to certify that funds are not available privately at a reasonable interest rate. Turn in the documentation of your median household income, especially if it's less than the state poverty median household income. Documentation of other fund sources, if there are. Documentation that what you're proposing is consistent with the area comprehensive plan by the county or regional agency. And then RD has a form called the certification regarding debarment and suspension. It means that you're on the good list, you're not on the bad list. You'll need an engineering agreement and a legal services agreement. The preliminary engineering report is the outline is presented here in the slide. Deals with the project planning, your existing facilities, the need for the project, the alternatives that were considered, the selection of the alternative, your proposed project, the recommended alternative, and then the project schedule and cost estimate, and a conclusion and recommendations. The environmental report deals with wetlands, floodplains, wilderness, wildlife, national parks, trails and landmarks, wild or scenic rivers, cultural resources, historical and archaeological sites. It's always an important and sometimes a very time-consuming element of the project. If you're dealing with coastal barriers or critical habitats, important and prime farmlands, sole source aquifers, air quality, transportation and noise, underground storage tanks. It's a checklist that you'll go through, and if checklist will indicate if you need more information in any of these areas. USDA requires the application to be submitted electronically. The online application addresses all the items presented in the previous slides. Step one is just some level 2 e-authorization ID. Some personal information has to be turned in for the person who's going to be working on submitting everything. You need a social security number, 4 questions, security type questions, and then the legal name of the municipality has to be turned in, the tax ID number, the DUNS number for the community, and then the names of all the users who will be dealing with the application. You have to create electronic authorization ID for each one and indicate what their security role will be and what their email addresses are. Everything gets submitted to RD. RD approves and links your e-authorization ID to your municipal employer ID. And then you log in to RD Apply and create the application. Once the application is complete and accepted by USDA, then they kick out a letter of conditions. This lists all the conditions to be met before the project can proceed. It obligates the funds and sets the interest rate. Again, the interest rate that will be set will be a maximum, and it could be lower at when you finally get to loan closing. The letter of conditions will set the construction timeline. It'll get into details on disbursements, cost overruns, if you have excess money at the end of the project, and what you can do with those remaining funds. It sets the loan repayment schedule and sets up reserves if they're required. It lists requirements for the users, taxes, hookups, budget, insurance, bonding, any side agreements, audits, and compliance. It requires a right-of-way map and title opinions. This can be a time-consuming step and needs to be jumped on early on in the project. And then finally, construction plans and specifications have to be approved by Rural Development and the state agency. All the project permits and easements have to be secured and turned in. The state agency construction permit. If you're working in a state highway, you'll need permits from the Department of Transportation. County roads, you need County Road Commission permits. You may need state agency permits for wetlands, stream crossings, endangered species. You may need a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and it's possible you need one from the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And then there's the private party construction and permanent easements that have to be turned in. Now you get to bid the project. You'll place the bid ad in a local newspaper, 30-day minimum notice RD asked for, and it's sent to all qualified contractors. You want to get as many people bidding on your project as possible to get competitive prices. You'll notify all the builders, exchanges, and trade magazines that your project's out to bid. You'll have to open the bids publicly. The bids will be reviewed. You'll meet with the lowest bidder to review the project and then request Rural Development approval to award the bid. and award the bid to the low qualified contractor. Finally, there's going to be a loan closing. Schedule that loan closing date, a resolution approving the award of the construction contract, and approval for the officers to sign contract documents is necessary to be adopted by the municipal body, or if it's a nonprofit organization, by that body. The attendees at that loan closing will be someone from Rural Development, your bond counsel, your local attorney, your engineer, and municipal officials. The construction process, there's periodic progress meetings. Monthly pay requests have to be dealt with by the contractor. They'll turn in requesting money monthly, and the municipal body will have to approve those requests. Then you request the monthly drawdown of funds from RD, the loan and grant funds. The loan monies will come first, and if there's grant monies, once all the loan is drawn down, then the grant proceeds are drawn down. There's monthly approvals by the grantee to pay the contractor. Once construction is complete, you review the final punch list with the contractor and approve the final payment. I'm going to summarize what we've gone over so far. There's the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. Again, it covers water, wastewater, and stormwater projects for communities 10,000 or less in population. You have long-term loans up to 40 years. It can be less, especially if you're building something that just has a 20-year life, and then you're only going to get a loan for that 20 years, but it can be up to 40 years. And typically, if you're putting in pipe or sewers, they have more than a 40-year life, sewer pipe or water mains, and therefore the loan can be up to those 40 years to keep those monthly payments as low as possible. Then they have low interest rates that vary quarterly and are determined by the median household income. Currently, the poverty rate is 2.5%. The intermediate rate is 3.375, and the market rate is 4.25. Grants are available to assist communities if that median household income is greater than the amount set by the state, which is 80% of the non-metropolitan median household income. The grant can be up to 45%. And so if the state non-metropolitan median household income is $50,000, for example, then 80% of that is $40,000. So in this case, if the median household income was more than $40,000, the grant could be up to 45% of the project cost. If the median household income is less than that 80% figure set by the state, then the grant can be up to 75% of the project cost. The goal is to keep the project cost affordable. One example, with that $40,000 median household income, 1.5% of that is $600. That's the annual cost. $600 divided by 12 results in an affordable monthly cost of $50. So if your monthly cost is higher than $50 with O&M and debt, then a grant is possible to lower the monthly cost down to that $50. But if the monthly cost is less than $50, it's probably not going to be any grant dollars, all loan dollars. Grants cannot be used to lower user costs below similar system costs. You know, your neighboring communities who have similar situations. There are two other USDA Rural Development programs with grant assistance for pre-development costs, planning, engineering, doing the application. One of those programs is the Water and Waste Disposal Pre-Development Planning Grants. This is for communities with population of 10,000 or less, and the median household income has to be less than the poverty line or less than 80% of that state non-metropolitan median household income. The maximum grant for this program is 25%, 25,000 or 75% of the cost, whichever is less. There's also another program is a special evaluation assistance for rural communities and households. And this is for communities with a population less than 2,500 persons. And the median household income needs to be less than the poverty level or less than that 80% of the state non-metropolitan median household income. The maximum grant in this program is $30,000 or 100% of the cost, whichever is less. So it's a 100% grant. There's no match required for the small community that fits into that median household income level. Whereas the first planning grant that I talked about for the larger communities does require a 25% match. And as the interest rates do change sometimes every 3 months, so you have to be aware of that. Any grant greater than 45% also requires a violation notice from the agency with proper authority. Here's a detailed slide that we'll go over. That Rural Development wants customer user information. So across the top of there is I want to know the number of existing customers, the total monthly service usage, you know, what's the total wastewater or water consumed by those existing customers? How many customers are you going to have after the improvements? And then your projected total monthly service use. You know, if you had 100 customers using 4,000 gallons a month when you started, and you picked up another 50 customers, you'd use that same 4,000 gallons a month to project what the total monthly service would be at the end of the project. And then you come up with the number of equivalent dwelling units, EDUs. And we'll get into that in a minute, what that is. And then the commercial users, you have to list the number of existing customers you have, such as commercial, industrial, or schools, your non-residential folks, and their total monthly usage, be it metered water or metered wastewater, and then the number of users after improvement and the projected total flow at the end of the project, and then you calculate the number of EDUs. And so an EDU, for a residential EDU, is the sum of the monthly flow for the residential units divided by the number of residential units. The non-residential EDUs would equal all other flow, your commercial, industrial, schools, etc., divided by the EDU residential flow. So then you'll come up with the total number of EDUs, which equals the number of EDU residential plus the number of non-residential EDUs. So your total EDUs times 1.5% of the community's median household income would equal the total community annual affordable user charge. To calculate the amount of grant the community will be eligible for, you need to calculate the affordable loan. The affordable loan is related to the amount each household can afford. RD uses 1.5% of median household income for the affordable total user costs. That's the operation and maintenance costs plus debt service. So RD uses 1.5% of median household income before grant dollars come into play. You've got to be able to pay at least that much, 1.5% of your median household income. To find out how many households are in a community, RD converts all water and sewer use into those equivalent dwelling units that I made reference to. The equivalent dwelling unit is calculated by dividing the total monthly flow for all residential single-family dwelling units in the community by the number of residential units. This results in a monthly flow for the average dwelling unit, and this becomes the equivalent dwelling unit flow. The equivalent dwelling unit monthly flow is divided into all other monthly flows, your commercial, industrial, institutional, to come up with the EDUs related to the other flow. The total EDUs for the community are then known. If there are no water meters, then 5,000 gallons per month per EDU is used to estimate the number of EDUs for non-residential customers. The O&M budget needs to include a repair and replacement reserve for equipment in the system with a life of less than 40 years. The debt service portion of the budget includes all debt, any existing debt, the proposed new debt, and a 10% debt reserve if the new debt is a revenue bond, which is fairly typical. The total number of EDUs times the median household income times 1.5% is the amount of annual user charge that the community is assumed to be able to afford. From the affordable annual user charge, the O&M portion of the 1.5% is subtracted to find the affordable debt service. The affordable debt service would include your existing annual debt service and the new affordable annual debt service. The new affordable annual debt service divided by the capital recovery factor for the RD interest rate and term of the loan, which is typically 40 years, results in the amount of affordable new debt. For example, if the proposed project is $1 million project and the affordable debt is $600,000, then $400,000 would be the amount of grant the project would be eligible for. There are other factors. RD needs to have the grant money available. Each state gets an allocation annually of loan money and grant money. So they have to have the money available before they can obligate it to you. And the grant cannot reduce EDU costs below similar systems. Your neighboring communities. If everybody in the area is paying $60 a month for water, and you go through the calculations, and you see that you'd be paying $50 a month if you got a $500,000 grant. You wouldn't get that $500,000 grant. You'd get enough grant to bring your price up to $60 per month, and that's what the similar system factor does. This slide is intended to summarize the USDA RD grant procedure. The goal for the annual user cost is 1.5% of median household income. So the annual user cost equals the O&M cost plus the debt service, where debt service is your annual principal and interest payment. The state non-metropolitan median household income is a factor that's used by RD. So if the debt service is less than 0.5% of the annual user cost and the median household income is less than 80% of that state non-metropolitan median income, then the grant can be up to 75%. If the debt service is greater than 1% of the annual user cost and the median household income is greater than 80% of that state non-metropolitan median income and less than 100% of the state non-metropolitan median household income, then the grant can be up to 45%. If the median household income of the community is greater than the state non-metropolitan median household income, then there's no grant, market rate only. Oh, we'll talk about the State Revolving Loan Funds. That's the other source of money for the small community projects. And in fact, the State Revolving Loan Funds are open to communities of all sizes, whereas the RD program for water and sewer is limited to communities less than 10,000 population. And but the State Revolving Loan Funds, there are two programs, Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund are both low interest loan programs, and communities of all sizes are eligible. Their interest rates typically are in their 1% to 2% range. So they're more competitive than today's RD rates. However, because RD lets you go out 40 years, and because they have grant money available, if the community has a low median household income, the RD program is very attractive. The State Revolving Loan Funds also have, in recent years, they've gotten into principal forgiveness, which is a grant. And typically, they're given out to some principal forgiveness goes to disadvantaged communities, and that's, those communities with low median household income. If the affordability and their annual user costs are such, then they wind up with being eligible for some principal forgiveness. Also, green project components also are eligible for some principal forgiveness, some grant money. The 1987 amendments to the Clean Water Act was a shift from grants for specific projects to clean water capitalization grants to states to create revolving loan funds. The state puts in a 20% match. The Clean Water Revolving Fund can do wastewater treatment and collection sewers. The Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund was deemed successful, and a similar program was started for drinking water in 1996. So over those 9 years of successful projects with the wastewater area, the feds decided to get in the business and do this also for drinking water. The 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act included capitalization grants for states to create the Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. The State Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program is a state-operated program to provide loans and other financial assistance for public drinking water improvement projects. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires that states provide 20% matching funds to federal dollars in order to capitalize the Drinking Water Revolving Fund program. Therefore, every $1 invested by the state secures 5 federal dollars. The Drinking Water Revolving Funds provide funding for public water systems to improve or replace water system pipes, treatment plants, storage tanks, and sources of water to ensure safe drinking water and provide essential public health protection. Funding for drinking water infrastructure improvement projects are available as low-interest loans. Disadvantaged community water systems may receive further assistance through principal forgiveness grants. Some states allow a direct loan from the revolving loan fund to the municipality. However, many states require the loan to be collateralized with municipal bonds. Thus, an attorney who specializes in municipal bonds needs to be involved in the project. The Federal Water Pollution Control Act amendments of 1972, further amended in 1977, this law became known as the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is the principal law governing pollution control and water quality of the nation's waterways. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund is a self-perpetuating loan assistance authority for water quality improvements in the United States. Congress established the fund in the Water Quality Act of 1987. The fund is administered by EPA and state agencies. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which replaced the Clean Water Act Construction Grants Program, provides loans for the construction of municipal wastewater facilities. The Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2014 amended the Federal Water Pollution Control Act to require Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs to develop affordability criteria that includes income, unemployment data, population trends, and other data determined relevant by the state. So the federal money is a grant to the state, and it is up to each state to set the parameters for accessing the money through their revolving loan funds. The feds provide guidelines as to how much of the federal grant can be used as a set-aside for various programs. The set-aside is generally a max of 30% of the federal grant and can be used to subsidize disadvantaged communities with lower interest loans, provide principal forgiveness, provide technical assistance, and similar programs. Some states are more aggressive than others in this regard. Many states also use poverty data and sewer user charge as a percent of the median household income to determine affordability and thus the principal forgiveness criteria. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund is a federal state partnership to ensure safe drinking water. It was created in 1996 by the amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act, and it provides financial support to water systems and state safe water programs. So it's a state-operated program to provide loans. The drinking water provides funding to public water systems to improve or replace their pipes, treatment plants, storage tanks, etc. So it's very similar to the clean water program. It has a max of 31% of the federal grant that can be used for the state for various programs such as low interest rates, principal forgiveness, etc. In 2018, one part of the new federal American Water Infrastructure Act allowed disadvantaged communities to finance their water system project up to 40-year max for the life of the facility. Previous, the max loan for the drinking water was 20 years. And, however, it's up to each state to make the change in their program. Some states that may require a change in the state's legislation to allow the extended time period for the loan. The next step in the financing process is a team. You need to assemble a team of professionals. You need someone in the financial area, the legal area, and the technical area. The financial area is a consultant to assist with financial projections, your financial packaging, debt service structuring, user rates. Your legal is a local attorney to review contracts, land issues, and related project details. If the state requires municipal bonds as collateral for debt, then a bond counsel is needed to provide a legal opinion on the bonds and prepare the related paperwork. Technical, you need an engineer to assist with the funding application and prepare that preliminary engineering report, do the design, the construction plans, specifications, bidding documents, and construction oversight. Selecting that team of professionals, you need that your financial consultant and bond consultant. You want people with experience with the agency and program that is being considered. Your local attorney, you want someone who can work with it and can complete assignments in a timely manner. Selection of the engineer, this is extremely important. Many communities have a working relationship with an engineer or engineering firm. A new major project should present a reason for the community to select the most qualified engineer and engineering firm available to them. The process for selection is called quality-based selection, QBS. This is not a selection based upon low price. It is not a bid process. Prepare a formal request for qualifications, advertise it publicly, should include all the services, planning, design, and construction. Their criteria should be demonstrated competence and qualifications for the type of project being considered. You review the statement of qualifications, prepare a shortlist, and interview at least 3 firms. Be sure the person you are interviewing, meeting with is going to be the project manager assigned to your project. Communication skills are critical. You want someone with experience with your type of project and the funding programs to be used. The engineer should be well acquainted with all the funding programs presented in the previous slides. In small communities, the engineer will be taking the lead in applying for the project funding and taking care of all the details. During the interview, you can have a chance to discuss concepts and methods for furnishing services. Find out what the engineer is thinking of in regards to project concepts and just how they would furnish their services. If they're not a local firm, would they be setting up some shop locally or something like that? Secure references. Check them, both local government and funding agencies. Visit the community where an engineer did a similar project. Ask questions about communications, project planning, design process, change orders, budgets. Score the interviews. Here's a little matrix that can be used to compare the various engineering firms that you've interviewed. Engineering fees will be fairly significant in the range of 10 to 20% of the total project. It could be higher, probably won't be less. So you negotiate a contract with the most qualified engineer firm. Compensation needs to be fair and reasonable. If contract negotiations with the preferred engineer are not satisfactory to the community, move on to the next firm. During the preliminary phase, the engineer will assist in defining the project, prepares the project proposal or preliminary engineering report, assist in preparation of the funding application and proposal, and assist with presenting the project to the public. The application details will be that brief narrative that we talked about previously. You need that documented need from the state agency and clearinghouse submittals. You also need that SHPO review and comments, that State Historic Preservation Officer, very important. The environmental assessment has to be done to determine if additional environmental information is necessary. Need that evidence of community financial need. This is the preliminary engineering report outline that we've talked about before. And this outline has been adopted by all federal agencies and is part of the application for USDA funding. Some of the states do not require a preliminary engineering report per se. They want engineering information, but they don't necessarily have to follow this outline. Public participation, vital to the success of the project. Newspaper articles, notices with billing statements, mass mailings. Public hearings are generally required by the funding agency. There's methods to win community support. Line up your supporters. Know your opposition. Show benefits of the completed project. Listen to your community and respond. Fill in information gaps. Don't overwhelm people with technical data. During the design phase, the engineer will create design documents. And this design phase doesn't start until funding is secure, because you'll spend some money during this part of the project. Probably 5 to 10% of the final project costs will be wrapped up in design. So the engineer during this phase will direct the necessary investigations for soil borings and bench tests. Soil borings may be needed for foundation design or to determine underground conditions for the area of utilities. The borings will assist the engineering during the design process and the contractor during the bidding process. The engineer will prepare the construction plans and specifications during this process. They all have to be submitted to the funding agencies and regulatory agencies, as well as the contractor is going to need them for bidding and construction. The engineer will assist with all the surveys for land and easements needed, and also applies for all necessary permits and assembles bidding and contract documents. Contract documents, which vary with different funding agencies, and always include basic documents such as general and project-specific conditions, bonding and insurance requirements, forms for the contract, payment requests, and change orders. During the construction phase, the engineer will assist with bid advertisements that are placed in the local newspaper and construction magazines and direct mail to contractors. The engineer will assist in reviewing all the bids, and the local attorney will get involved in that to make sure they're complete before they're presented to the owner for signing and submitted to the agencies. The engineer will oversee completion of contract documents, monitor construction progress and payments, generally on a monthly basis, review and recommend change orders, which are to be expected, and generally there is some contingency budget item provided for such. Engineers are not perfect. There may be errors in the design or unforeseen conditions in the field, thus changes in the construction that warrant extra payment or extra time. The engineer will prepare your final punch list and project closeout. Do we have time for questions?
I think we do have time for a couple questions. Right off the bat, we did get a few questions about whether the presentation would be available. Yes, we will be posting this, a PDF of the slides and also a recording of the webinar on our website, efcnetwork.org, under past events. So if you registered for the webinar, you'll get an email to the same address that you registered with that information. And then here is the question, John. So this question is about rural water districts. So based on your knowledge of these funding programs, can rural water districts utilize the USDRD program or other programs that you've spoken about?
Yes, they can. And the key is if there are several communities within that district, each of the communities should be less than 10,000 in population. Hope that answers the question.
I think it does. That sounds good to me. We can always reach out if there's any follow-up questions too. And then we do have time for one last question. So we've gone over sort of everything from start to finish. So this last question is, where can you go for more information? Do you have any good resources for using these funding programs that you've encountered in your experience? Booklets, funding guides, websites?
Well, all in every state, rural development has staff who are very helpful. So you go to the USDA website and find rural development, and then go to the particular state that you're in, and it'll list the names of some folks. And the same is true for the State Revolving Loan Fund. The Environmental Finance Center Network has on their website, there's a clearinghouse listing all the grants and loans that are available for water and wastewater projects, and also I believe they list contact persons, phone numbers, and email addresses for folks. Also, engineering firms are, this is their bread and butter, these projects, and engineering firms are very knowledgeable on all these projects and the financing for the projects.
Great. On that note, you should all have received a link to take our evaluation. If you have a couple minutes and would like to give us feedback, feel free. And one last thing that we like to do before we close out is just to quickly, like we mentioned in the beginning, one thing that the EFCN does is provide in-depth technical assistance. So if you still have questions about funding after this program and you'd like to talk with John or another engineer that works with us, you could do that. We could possibly set you up with someone who has some experience working in your state, if you're not comfortable going right to some of these websites and going into the funding guides yourselves. So go ahead and you can tell us here. This is a little short poll. Are you interested in receiving technical assistance? Yes, no, not sure. Just very quickly tell us what you think, and we will get in touch with you if you reply positively. Okay.
I've listed I've listed my contact information, so if at a later date a question comes up on any part of my presentation, do not hesitate to give me a call or email me. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, I'm closing this poll now. And then, John, anything else to add before we close out for the day?
Have a good day, everybody.
All right, see you later.